You
being a part of that.
shifted the industry with women are not small men, and I first started seeing you talking about cold bludgeons and all that. But what's the next big variable we're still missing, in your opinion?
Um, well, right now I'm really going after the longevity conversation,
Oh,
right? Because we see all this stuff. And again, it's being brought out by the middle of the bell curve, which is primarily male data. But we look, there's sex differences in every system of the body. Women age a little bit differently, as we see from autoimmune diseases and how they occur. But then we also have to bring in lifelong exercisers, right? That's not part of the conversation. If we look at some of the epigenetic changes that happen in a woman's body, if she's been exercising her life and what kind of exercise that is versus a man who's been exercising his whole life and what kind of things he's been doing and how that's affected his body. None of that is brought into the conversation yet. But that's mine. I'm bringing
and
it in.
that's what we're going to talk about. I mean, even with female focused training, there's still, as you just said, the data, the recovery, the wearables, that's all being misinterpreted because the science behind it was based off of men. So these women are wearing this stuff and they're wondering why they have different output, their biometrics are changed and all that. But you're saying it's all based on men. How do we get that conversation to switch, and where does it? How do we start looking at the data differently?
Yeah, and then that's the problem. I mean, we've seen a big positive shift in the research, especially sports science research, in about the past 6 or 7 years, where they're really starting to go after women and really taking into account menstrual cycle. It's not perfect yet. Still have a lot of things to do, but at least that shift is coming. We're also seeing it in some of the healthcare work that's coming out too, looking at sex differences in a lot of the disease presentation. So we're seeing this shift in the research, and now we have to have a shift in the dissemination of that and how we are expressing it. I think one of the biggest things that is a driver is AI and algorithms that are behind all of the metrics for AI as well as wearables. Again, it's still the middle of the bell curve, and we're just creating an echo chamber of data where we think about who's writing the algorithms, where the data is coming from, how the machine learning is occurring. Again, it's all in that middle of the bell curve. So there's a group of us on the outside that are pushing and saying we have to look at the nuances here. We have to have female data science engineers writing some of the algorithms because they're writing through the female lens. They understand the experience, they look at the nuances. So we do have to go back into industry and say, hey, look, we can't just keep doing this from a male lens. We can't just keep generalizing and having the same output. Even the language output in some of the platforms that we have, right? We'll see some of the training platforms are very aggressive in their language of, oh, you went slower today, maybe you need to take a recovery, instead of, oh, maybe you're using a different bike, or maybe you were on a coffee ride. Like there's no other input. It's all this really aggressive negative type language, and women don't ascribe to that as much. Yes, of course there are outliers, but for the most part women get really put off, and then they're like, I don't really want to use that product anymore. So there's a lot of things that we have to kind of unpack and go after in industry.
If you were to actually rebuild the system from scratch, what's the first thing you fix? Where did you start? Where would you start?
I would start all the way back when all of medicine started. And instead of having instead of having a room full of, because I mean, really, seriously, this is the
Right.
history, right? Like you have to think about how things have evolved. Like who was in the room who started things? And we think about modernization of medicine, and we think about the way scientific design was originated. It was all men in the room, right? So it wasn't even a concept that women might be different. But if there had been women in the room, they could have said, hey, wait a second. You guys don't have a monthly bleed, or you don't have this, you don't have that, you don't have pregnancy. So we have to bring that into the conversation too. So I would reverse all the way back to the start of modern medicine and science and put a different perspective into the room, knowing that I can't do that. How do we do it now? So this is where we start the conversation and go, if you're, because there are things that haven't even been designed or put out yet that we'll see in 3 years. Like the ideas haven't even come out. So we start the conversation now. As those ideas develop in 2, 3, 4, 5 years, it will already have all of this encompassed. So it's like, let's push those conversations out. So can't go back in time. Let's start now.
All right. So, what biomarkers should women actually be paying attention to and following that nobody's talking about?
Oh, I think part of it right now is we just have to do trends over time. Things like heart rate variability that's been so like thrown into as a recovery marker. It's not specifically accurate for women because the initial algorithm is looking at how we have beat to beat for men, but there's a slight difference in beat to beat length between men and women. So an algorithm will show
Mhm.
up as women have a little bit of a less recovery because of this algorithm. And then we see across the menstrual cycle or hormonal contraception, there's a difference between phases where we see autonomic nervous system changes. So then the heart rate variability plummets because if we have a change in the autonomic nervous system due to progesterone, then we'll have a decrease in our resting heart rate. We'll have a decrease in, or sorry, an increase in our resting heart rate, an increase in our respiratory rate, which means a decrease in our heart rate variability. So if we're looking at trends over time, then we can see specifically how it fluctuates over whatever hormone profile or life phase we're in. Even in pregnancy, we see changes and then there's a dip right before birth. So we can use it for trends over time, but we can't use it as a day to day metric. And I think that's how we have to look at most metrics that are out there. Is a day to day is not appropriate. Trends over time, yes.
Especially when you're dealing with 25-year-olds and premenopausal, there's a huge gap that doesn't happen in
Yeah.
men, and women have to pay attention to that as well, right?
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Because if we look at the way that people view aging and changes in cardiac function, we're thinking of a linear change, which is primarily what happens as men get older. There's a linear change in things. But for women, we have these just discernible points. Like we have a specific change at puberty where we're seeing biomechanical and cardiovascular changes. Then we have our reproductive years. And what does that look like? Do you have PCOS, which is a different cardiovascular output from heart rate variability and such, than someone who has endometriosis, depending on the phase, than someone who's on an oral contraceptive pill versus an IUD versus naturally cycling. So you really have to understand your own hormone profile. Then we have pregnancy. And then we have, at times of high stress and heavy training for athletes, and that also affects it. And then we go into perimenopause, which is all over the show, and then postmenopause, which is a completely new baseline. So there's not linear anything in women's lives, right? But we've just assumed that this is the data and this is how it scopes from decade to decade.